The knock came at exactly 12:17 a.m., soft enough to sound uncertain but desperate enough to make my heart race. I had lived alone in my small house in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, for nearly 3 years after my painful divorce, and no one ever came to my door that late. As I looked through the peephole, every memory I had spent years trying to bury came rushing back. Standing on my porch beneath the flickering light was Margaret, my ex-mother-in-law. Her gray coat was soaked from the rain, her hands trembled against the handle of an old suitcase, and tears streamed silently down her face. Even before I opened the door, I could read the words forming on her lips. She had nowhere left to go. If you believe kindness can heal broken hearts, forgiveness can rebuild shattered families, and second chances still matter, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in hope, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories that remind us humanity is never truly lost. 3 years earlier, I had walked away from my marriage to Nathan after realizing that love could not survive where trust no longer existed. The divorce had been painful but peaceful enough, although the hardest part had been losing Margaret. She had welcomed me into her family from the first day I met her. She treated me like the daughter she never had, baking pies together every Thanksgiving, calling every Sunday afternoon, and never forgetting my birthday. When Nathan and I separated, she found herself trapped between her son and the woman she cared deeply about. She chose loyalty to her family, and I understood. We stopped talking, not because we hated each other, but because life quietly placed an impossible distance between us. When I opened the door that rainy night, Margaret looked smaller than I remembered. The confident woman who once organized church fundraisers and neighborhood dinners had disappeared. Exhaustion filled her eyes. Without asking questions, I carried her suitcase inside, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and made a cup of hot tea. Only after the warmth returned to her trembling hands did she finally explain what had happened. Nathan had lost his job over a year earlier. Pride kept him from telling anyone how serious things had become. Bills piled up. Arguments became routine. Eventually he sold his mother's house without giving her many choices, promising they would move into a larger place together. Instead, after months of tension and frustration, he announced he was moving across the country with someone else and left Margaret behind in a temporary motel with little money and nowhere permanent to stay. She refused to burden distant relatives who were already struggling. After sitting alone for hours with her suitcase beside the motel bed, only one address remained in her heart. Mine. Listening to her story stirred emotions I thought had long disappeared. Part of me remembered the loneliness I had endured after the divorce, while another part remembered every act of kindness Margaret had shown me when I first moved to Iowa knowing no one. I realized that compassion sometimes asks us to separate one person's mistakes from another person's character. She had never betrayed me. She had simply become another victim of circumstances she never wanted. The following weeks changed both of our lives in unexpected ways. Margaret insisted on helping around the house despite my protests. She cooked meals that filled every room with familiar aromas, tended the neglected flower beds, and somehow made my quiet home feel alive again. Neighbors who barely waved before began stopping to chat after tasting her homemade bread. Slowly, laughter returned to rooms that had echoed with silence for years. One afternoon, while organizing old boxes in the garage, Margaret discovered the woodworking tools my late father had left me. I had always dreamed of restoring antique furniture but never believed I could turn that dream into reality. Margaret encouraged me every evening, cheering over each finished chair and polished table as if I were creating priceless art. She convinced the local church to host a small community craft fair where I displayed my work. To my surprise, nearly everything sold. Orders continued arriving through word of mouth, and within months I opened a modest restoration workshop that finally gave me both financial stability and renewed confidence. As my life blossomed again, so did Margaret's. She began volunteering at a nearby senior center, where her warmth quickly made her everyone's favorite storyteller. Watching her smile again reminded me that healing often begins not when our circumstances improve, but when someone simply chooses not to turn us away. Months later, Nathan unexpectedly wrote asking if he could visit. I agreed, not because I wanted to relive the past, but because forgiveness had quietly replaced resentment. Seeing his mother healthy, surrounded by friends, and genuinely happy forced him to confront the consequences of his choices. No dramatic confrontation followed, only sincere apologies and honest conversations. Some relationships could never return to what they once were, but broken hearts no longer carried bitterness. If this story has touched your heart or reminded you of someone who deserves another chance, please support the video by liking it, sharing it with others, and subscribing so more people can discover stories filled with hope and compassion. Before this story ends, I'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment and tell us whether you would have opened the door that rainy night, or if someone once showed you unexpected kindness when you needed it most. Today, Margaret still lives in the small guest room at the end of my hallway, although it no longer feels like a guest room. It feels like family. Life taught both of us that home is not defined by the people who leave us behind, but by those willing to open a door when the rest of the world closes theirs. Sometimes the greatest miracle isn't finding a new beginning. It's discovering that compassion can quietly rebuild a family where no one believed one could ever exist again.